Hello and welcome once more to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today my guest is Giles Hutchins. Hi Giles.
Hello Iain.
And he's written a couple of books and the first one is called The Nature of Business, Redesigning for Resilience. And his latest one that hasn't been out too long is The Illusion of Separation, Exploring the Cause of Our Current Crisis. And we're going to talk about both books and hear about Giles' life and just see, as always, where the program goes. So I pulled a bit off the back of The Illusion of Separation. And I'd like to start with this, Giles. You wrote, "The deeper we look into nature, the more we realise that nothing in life is separate. Everything is a dynamic interplay. Life is essentially co-creative, fluid and connective. Separateness is an illusion we have created which has fast become a dangerous delusion, infecting how we think and relate in business, politics and beyond." Well, that's very profound, and that's something at Conscious TV we're very aware of, and we're always looking for different ways to look at that. So let's just look at your life briefly. And when was the first time that you became aware of this illusion of separation?
Well, I suppose I've always been in love, deeply in love with life, with nature. I've always felt a deeper interrelationship with life from as early as I can recall. You know, nature programs with David Attenborough around instinct and things being embedded within the gene, how the salmon, for instance, got back home, or how a cat found its owners across land after they had moved, and things like that didn't ring true to me, that it was all about just being embedded within genes, and the instinct was something else, was kind of like an instinctual field, a matrix. So I suppose I always had that and always questioned when I was young, but it wasn't until perhaps much later in my life that all these sort of bits started coming together for me, all these different drivers in my life around sustainability, around passion for life, a struggle with violence in general in life, then came to me looking at, well, what was underlying all of these, what was the underlying cause for all of these challenges that we had? And the deeper I explored in my own self and through other people's readings, I actually came to a recognition that our lack of attuning with the sacredness in life is what causes a lot of the problems, whether it be bullying right through to ecological destruction.
Because you worked quite a long time as a management consultant, didn't you?
Yep.
KPMG, which is a very big international, well-known company, well-respected company. So how was that for you working there?
Well, I kind of convinced myself, Iain, that working in business was a way in which I would be able to understand the system and find out about the system. I mean, early on in my life, I had some exposure with activism and animal rights and so forth, and I was very passionate about certain things, and I wanted to see how I could use my acumen in the best possible way to see how the system could be transformed. So understanding how businesses themselves worked and working across sectors through management consultancy was very useful. Yet the actual system itself and the way in which work went about was constraining. KPMG was actually a very good employer for me and trained me well. Yet I was constantly suppressing that love for life, I suppose, convincing myself that one day I would become a CEO and be able to change an organisation from within. And it got to a point in my life where I realised that it was actually a David Attenborough programme again. It was something he said at the end of the programme, a poignant about humanity was now getting close to the point of no return, that if it continued behaving like this, that the awesome diversity of life would be threatened beyond measure. And that for me was a calling that I realised that I couldn't watch any longer. I had to activate and I had to make change happen and try and follow my heart.
But isn't that really how change happens? It happens from the top of big companies, and if it's not political leaders, it's business leaders or religious leaders. Aren't they the key people for catalysts for change?
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly leaders can affect real change in these top-down hierarchies. But what we're actually seeing is a shift from the kind of top-down hierarchies to ones that are more emergent. And you can also, even in these top-down hierarchies, create your own oasis of change, which I tried to do later on as I then moved into sustainable business, tried to bring values in the small bit of business that I worked in and try and affect change from within. You can do that. I think we all, regardless of our position and rank in that hierarchy, can still make change happen through our own relationships and just living our own truth. It is difficult, and to actually affect real change, that top-down hierarchy is important. But we're actually, I think, shifting to a place where grassroots activism, empowerment, localism, Creative Commons, and all of these things are actually helping challenge that top-down hierarchy.
So in a way, what you're saying is the real power lies with the individual, and the people at the top, if they're in tune, follow the changes that are happening more down here in the grassroots. Is that what you're saying?
In tune with the whole environment, the whole nature, I would argue, with a capital N. If they're in tune with actually the body and soul of the organisation and the soil of the culture of the organisation, yeah, that's a really good leader.
Yeah. And are leaders generally responding to that, do you think?
I think we're getting more of them. Let's be honest, most leaders are still, I think, inured in the current paradigm, which is one of command and control, atomised thinking, quantised KPIs, fragmented, really caught up in the illusion of separation, a linear, mechanistic approach to business. But we're shifting, I think, into recognising that there's much more to life, and that business doesn't need to be a distraction to real life. It can actually be a way in which we serve a greater sense of purpose. At the moment, I think there's a big void around what a sense of purpose is. Hence why you have people perhaps going off to fanatical groups like ISIS, or joining up more around philosophical groups or grassroots activists, because they're looking for a sense of purpose, which is largely void in our current paradigm.
You mentioned something like ISIS, which is very, very extreme. So what you're saying is, for them, it's a positive thing. For people that goes off to Syria to fight, or IS, as they seem to have changed their name to now. So people that go and fight for that cause, you see that as something that they're looking for something positive.
They're looking for a sense of purpose. They're gaining a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. And I suspect it's also mixed up with all sorts of messages around a calling to God in perhaps potentially a perverse way, because of course it involves violence, but it's a calling for them to actually feel like they have a sense of purpose with their lives, which they don't find here.
And in a way, we all have a sense of, we all have that calling, don't we, a sense of purpose, and many people don't follow that, which is very sad. And how much is to do you feel that's to do with society the way it is, and how much is it the lack of drive within the individual, do you think?
Well, it's this inner-outer attunement, isn't it? And certainly outside, we're quite outward focused in Western society, for want of a better phrase. And a lot of what we project out there is, I suppose, wanting the outward to change us. So we look at society, we look at our educational system, or we look at leaders to affect change, whereas actually some of that has to come from inward. Yet if the outward is structured in such a way that it doesn't in any way encourage the looking inward, then that doesn't help, and we get caught up. So we're in a society which is largely carcinogenic, consumeristic. It's destroying life, it's destroying our own relationships, breaking down society, and therefore there's no sense of actually serving others. It becomes very self-absorbed, caught up in that own illusion. Hence, we actually cut ourselves off from our own sense of purpose. We get caught up in this devastating delusion, which is a great shame, and it leads to all sorts of dead zones. Just as we get dead zones in the ocean, we're getting kind of dead zones in our society, which are filled with, detritus, with pornography, with violence in towns, because people are grasping for a sense of something which they're not finding in society and not finding in themselves, because a lot of education isn't stimulating us to actually know thyself. It's about trying to get a job, trying to earn a living. So you can get a car, so you can get a debt, so you can get a mortgage, so you can, carry the treadmill going, rather than digging in deep, which is what education truly meant for the ancient Greeks, and actually transforming yourself to try and go through a process of understanding yourself and trying to realize who you really are.
That's a big question, realising who we really are.
Yeah.
How's that going for you?
It's a constant journey. Fits and starts, ups and downs, swings and roundabouts. It seems a long time since I made that definitive change to say, look, I'm going to shift what my work is. I'm going to shift my outward life to try and attune with my inner calling of my heart. Seems a long time ago, but actually it's been a really enjoyable journey if I look back on it. It's been hard, following your heart. You upset parents, loved ones, society, you're viewed as becoming seen as valuable to actually being kind of questionable. Yet, actually, you're calling upon a deeper reservoir. And so for me, I love it. I couldn't change it for the world. I couldn't not follow my heart. But it doesn't mean to say it's easy. It's simple in lots of ways, opening up to natural awareness and being who you truly are. But it's not easy, certainly not for me anyway.
So when you were at KPMG and you had, I think from what you were saying, quite a high-powered and important job, how much did you try and change things from within?
Well, my first step was to look at how we could set up a practice around sustainability, sustainable business, because I was trying to see if I could use my wherewithal around business transformation to help a shift towards a more sustainable world. So that was my first step, and actually set up a practice around Atos, KPMG Consulting as it then was and then became Atos, around sustainability. So I actually left the job where I had a team of 40 or 50 people and my own P&L, my own practice, into working on my own and starting something from scratch. Seen from the company's perspective from being a high earner to a but actually, I think it soon dawned on people that it was very passionate for me. And I learned that actually there's one thing just being passionate. The other thing is actually being able to engage with people. A bit like the animal rights, you can't fight violence with violence. And sometimes when I was allowing my passion to come through, I was kind of almost, saying to people, can't you see, we need to change. And of course that doesn't help. You need to get on board with people and you need to empathize with them, listen to where they're at, and then work with them, make change happen. So it was quite a big process for me to actually go about how to affect change in the most effective way. And that took a while and was quite hard, actually. I was seen as, I suppose, not so successful in the company's eyes, but it then led to me actually getting a global role, which was a massive break for me because it actually meant I could move out of London and get closer to nature and help rejuvenate my inner soul.
So you were working in sustainability for KPMG?
For Atos. Atos, an IT services company.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did that practically entail?
Well, quite quickly, I kind of separated sustainability into two sides of the same coin. One which was internal stuff, the carbon waste and water footprint and activities that we as an organisation incur, and the outward facing stuff, which is how can we help our clients and our suppliers and our customers and the people we relate with become more sustainable. And that's through services. So providing services that enable them to become more sustainable. And that was more my natural bent than the inner part, which is more about measuring, monitoring and reducing. So I then set that up in a way that I could focus more on the outward piece. And then started innovating solutions to help our clients, and found key people in the organisation and tried to get them engaged to help with me, begging, borrowing and stealing bits of people's time, and tried to do something from the ground up. It's quite hard work for a couple of years, struggling really, until I got the global role, and that was things got easier from there on in.
So getting the global role meant what, practically?
It meant that I didn't have to necessarily just focus on generating revenue in the UK. I could then seed these practices around the world and actually engage with global accounts at global level, so some large multinational organisations, chemicals companies, right through to government institutions, large charities and so forth, and start engaging with them at a much bigger level. And it also meant, for me, that I had to travel to Amsterdam, to Paris, to Munich, and other parts of the world, that actually I could free myself up from London. I could move, because already in my mind, I was on a path of personal transformation, because parallel to all this work was me doing more yoga, becoming more mindful, meeting my girlfriend, who then, my soulmate, who then became my wife. Changes were going on in the inside, and I was trying to attune that inner and outer. And for me, it was clear that at some point in time I was going to move on, and that I needed to be freer, to really go deeper in what I was feeling, which is how to not just be inspired by nature, which is what I started writing about for The Guardian and then for The Nature of Business, but actually then looking at how we could become in harmony with nature. And that was then looking at the whole philosophical mindset, the flawed paradigm that we're in. And that was going to put me up against the capitalistic system, so I needed to, it would have been difficult for me to justify how the work around the illusion of separation related to my global role. So once I knew I was going in that direction, it was a case of how could I move out of London and start connecting myself deeper with nature.
Yeah, we had this discussion last night about, to some extent the capitalist system, and I made the point to you that the capitalist system is built on growth, but actually nature is always growing, and nature, people, this is for me something that's not always an easy question to answer. People say, isn't nature wonderful and it's in harmony and everything else? But actually what nature is doing is very selfish in many ways, because everything that survives because something else doesn't. And so that everything is basically taking the risk, either physically eating or taking the resources that something else could have had. And so I wonder, and in a way, that's what capitalism does. Again, it's a very selfish system built on expansion, built on I'm better than you and I'm more successful than you. And yet, nature's doing the same, isn't it?
Well, I think the reason why we've ended up in the capitalist system, certainly why we've justified it, because I think powerful elites probably needed a justification, was based on a philosophy that assumed that was how nature was, survival of the fittest, which wasn't exactly what Charles Darwin actually said and observed. Aspects of his work were then extrapolated into neo-Darwinian principles, which have ended up with this, nature being viewed as red in tooth and claw and hyper-competitive. In reality, now we're seeing with our scientific endeavours that actually nature is more like what the ancients and the ancient shamanic tribes understood nature to be. That there are laws, for want of a better word, natural orders, an inherent grammar flowing throughout nature that we would do well to attune to. And so what I talk about in The Nature of Business is this shift in business from hyper-competitive, command and control, KPI focused, to actually something which is more interrelated, reciprocating, yes, also competitive, but collaborative, systems-based, distributed, diverse, all the qualities that we actually find in nature in resilient ecosystems. We actually find capitalistic traits in certain immature male mammalian species and rodents, and certain what they call certain type K and R aspects of nature. For instance, when weeds spread rapidly within a clearing of a forest, you get that kind of capitalistic behaviour, but actually not in mature ecosystems. And as human beings, you would hope that we are able to operate at least in all of those different qualities, if not in the more mature area. So we are representing an aspect of nature, but we're representing one small aspect of it and maximising it as the only dominant paradigm and squeezing everything else out. And that's what's causing the problem. There's nothing wrong with capitalism. It's a very powerful tool, and it's a very powerful expression of nature within a diverse collage.
So you seem to be saying that nature in itself has an inherent intelligence. It's competitive, but somehow ecosystems can look after themselves, and taking it a step further, it seems as mankind interferes more and more, we're actually destroying or limiting those ecosystems within nature. And on the outside, in the business world, we're doing the same thing, aren't we? Because we have a very fragile financial system around the world, as well as a fragile ecological system around the world, and that has come from our own unclarity. Would you agree? I'm summarising.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes. And what's interesting is that when you look at Western philosophy, or the origins of Western philosophy, because again, Western philosophy has tended towards kind of rationalism, materialism, and capitalism, but actually its origins, and this is what I found very interesting about the second book, The Illusion of Separation, was exploring that actually there was an inherent truth that we all understood. The ancient Greeks, ancient Chinese, the Egyptians, all of these, and shamanic tribes as well, that truth, or that intelligence, which is an interesting word, I would perhaps say wisdom, Sophia running throughout nature, is there. And to attune with that is what enables us to be Homo sapiens, wise beings. And we're not attuning with it. We're caught up in what Albert Einstein called an optical delusion of our own consciousness.
How did you find that this shift in your career started to change you on the inside? You've just given some hints about how you took up, I think you said yoga and meditation. I know from reading some notes you sent me earlier, you also took up Tai Chi at some point. So how was it changing you on the inside?
I think once I knew that I had a sense of purpose, that after that David Attenborough program, I wrote a note to myself, now I begin. And I made a point of beginning from that moment onwards. Then I suppose helping my own well-being, helping my own sense of focus and presence was really important. So I could start walking my own talk, and also so I could perform, because this was now important. I had, that energy was flowing through me, that sense of purpose, as well as lots of stuff that was repressed. So it was very interesting, stuff would come out perhaps in not always constructive ways. So I had to sort of manage part of that process, which I didn't know Jungian psychology at the time, but looking at it, there was a lot of kind of unconscious stuff blurting out of me. But for me, yoga, meditation was a great way for me to just start stilling the mind and getting back to how I always felt I was. Now, whether I was or not, I don't know, but it certainly felt like a coming home, coming back to a natural awareness, which then also related to some of these little peak activities and insights I had, or epiphanies, people might call them, where I started sensing that the world was actually innately love, and ought I not be living within that love rather than living outside it, which was a challenge for me, because I still struggle with that on a day-to-day basis, how to really live with love in all my actions and interactions. But at the time, that was blending with meditation, with opening up to this natural awareness that I used to remember from before, and realizing that the more present you are, the more actually you allow love to flow through what you do. So that started relating to me wishing to engage with other people, reach out to other people, empathize with other people, and try and make change happen. So the two kind of started. I mean, I'm making it sound like it was a nice dance. In reality, it was much messier than that. And sometimes a lot of the yoga and meditation was just a chance for me to chill out from work. But the more I did the yoga, this yoga school called Tara Yoga, which was actually tantric based and really focusing on the energy systems in the body and feeling that, the more I was embodying it, I was feeling it. And so I knew it was true. And that, I suppose, to start off with, was a form of perhaps spiritual materialism. I got maybe addicted to that rather than going out and getting drunk. But it was a good shift. And then with time, you start letting go of that more and I started bringing it into how I go about my daily business.
So how did you feel the energy when you were doing the yoga?
I mean, the more I got used to it, the more it used to sort of flow. But sometimes it would be stuck, or I'd feel tingling.
So I'm always interested when people say they feel energy, what that means in a tangible
Difficult
way.
to put in words, isn't it? Heat, perhaps, tingling, I mean, nice. It's a nice feeling. It's a lovely, relaxing feeling. Sometimes when I do yoga in the middle of the night, if I wake up, I seem to wake up around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes, I do some yoga and some meditation. Then I lay on my bed and do what's called yoga nidra, just focusing on different parts of my body. And this was quite profound for me when I first started doing it a few years back, when I was still in London and still trying to, grapple with this transformation. Now when I do it in my bed, I really do feel an energy. I mean, some people would call it kundalini, but I feel an energy at the bottom of my spine, sometimes coming up just my spine a bit. And it's nice, it's warm, it's lovely. Feels like my body's just letting go and not grasping so much and just relaxing in, and feels like it's repairing itself.
Is that something you felt fairly early on, or did you have to be patient and wait for that feeling?
I had bits of feelings from the beginning, which helped, I think, because then you go, oh, there's something there. And the yoga itself, I mean, there were other types of yoga I tried in other schools, but what really I liked about this school is that we focused on holding the poses and feeling the energy and bringing our awareness into how our body felt, rather than it being about how good the pose was and moving through poses quickly, which was perhaps more about keeping fit. This was very much about focusing on the energetic feelings of the body. So I was lucky that I was in that school, and they were kind of sharing what it felt, and then I could share what it felt to me, and it kind of built your confidence in this experience.
That's something we're kind of, to a large extent, we've lost in society, isn't it? That ability to really feel, or willingness to feel what the body feels.
And there's actually people now, I'm engaging with one at the moment in business, who use things like applied improvisation, dancing, Tai Chi movements for business people to become more present.
Yes.
It's amazing because it allows this awakening, or this, what Otto Scharmer calls theory U, this presencing to happen within a business leader or a business manager.
Well, I was reading this article. I like the magazine Wired, which is an American version and a UK edition. I get the UK edition, obviously. And there was an article a few months ago in there about mindfulness and meditation being taught in big corporations.
Yeah.
And both Google and Microsoft have practitioners that teach both meditation and mindfulness. Now, I'm not saying those corporations are all good corporations, because they do a lot of things that are not particularly, would seem to be not the best for humanity, but it does show you that there is an effort there in many, many big companies to try and balance things out a bit. And you can say also it's and I get this, and I'm fine with this. You can also say, well, it's common sense. You want your employees to be healthy and happier. But there's nothing wrong with that. If it's encouraging people to be more in tune, then everybody benefits, the employee, society, and the company.
And it's opening a door to allow a deeper transformation to happen for those people.
Yes.
Whether the organisation actually wants that, of course, they don't perhaps necessarily want people to find their own sense of purpose, I don't know. Maybe all they're interested in is improved efficiency and effectiveness. But it's opening a door to allow these people to actually become more conscious beings. So I think it has to be a positive trend.
Yeah. So, do you find I know you still have meetings with business leaders sometimes. Do you find generally there's changes for the best happening? It's a few years since you actually worked officially in that area. Is that an ongoing movement, or have you found that really being outside has been the only way to move that forward?
Ooh. I think you can do a lot within, actually. We used to call it entrepreneur within an organisation. I think you can make a lot of change within. And perhaps if, certainly, if I'd found it easier to work within a corporate system and I wasn't so perhaps needing nature on a regular basis, I could affect good change within an organisation. But for me, for my setup, and perhaps because I had overforced it, I needed the space and I needed to be freer. And I think a lot of people do need that. And you're getting a lot of people shifting into social entrepreneurship and innovation and making change outside. But I don't think you need to be outside. I think you can make good change from within. Certainly, I tend to work sometimes with change agents within, or business leaders that have their own initiatives, because I think there is a shift happening. And it's not just big business, it's all sorts of small organisations too, and changes in organisational structure, for instance, to more community initiatives, to open source, to peer-to-peer, all these networks that are actually allowing Creative Commons to come about, which is quite different from private ownership within capitalism, yet can go hand in hand. You can have, for instance, Nike actually was involved with the Creative Commons platform. So you have these rather interesting partnerships forming. And it's as if we're at this nexus, this shifting paradigm where really exciting stuff is happening. We may not always sense it because we're in the middle of it and there's so much not good stuff going on. We can't overlook that. We're still moving in a badly wrong direction. Yet there are lots of innovative shoots happening.
So when you say you use the words you need nature, what do you mean by that?
Well, for me, I felt I just needed to attune with to my more truer self, and the best way for me, the way that I love doing that is being in nature. So the air-conditioned offices and planes and hotels and everything that went with the work that I was doing felt like it was suffocating me. And okay, I used to meditate and do Tai Chi and yoga in my hotel room sometimes, but I felt like I needed to get out of it. And so sitting next to trees, as I love doing, and feeling an energy and being in nature, I'm so much more creative. So who knows, maybe we'll get to a time where actually business managers realize that, and that everything doesn't need to be confined to office blocks in London, because we have social media now and we have the technology to do that. But for me, I feel so much freer and more alive now because I haven't got that relentless confinement in a kind of industrial mechanistic paradigm. So
we were talking earlier about the you and trees. You have quite a special relationship. So tell us more how that came about and how that really works for you.
Well, I've always loved trees and walking in woods and sitting next to trees, but it was actually reading a book on Druid magic where it explained certain techniques about standing next to a tree. And at the time I was actually exploring reciprocity within nature, between fungi and trees.
What does that mean?
Reciprocity. So when you have a relationship that benefits both, that there's a reciprocating relationship. And I was exploring that in nature. Over and above, capitalism, which is just one person gains and the other person loses, or short-term maximization. So I was looking at that, and I realized that apparently, so the Druids felt, when you're next to a tree, that your energy is beneficial for the tree, and the tree's energy is beneficial for you. So there was this synergy happening. And so I used to stand next to trees and meditate, and there's certain structures that you can do. But actually just sitting next to a tree and clearing your mind is something I really enjoy doing, and I ended up starting to write articles while I was doing it, short articles, for The Guardian at the time, The Guardian Sustainable Business Network, and now for other networks. And I felt that I was certainly flowing more creatively. Certainly I felt freer when I was writing outside next to a tree. I even now do it, dare I say it, with crystals sometimes, Iain. Just sit there with clear quartz and you can really feel an energy.
So let me get this right. You've got a busy mind.
Yep.
You're sitting with a tree.
Yep.
You end up with a clear mind.
Yep.
And the poor tree gets all your busy mind. Is that
no,
right?
The tree. I don't know, of course, but according to Druid way, this tree actually benefits from your energy, from the human energy.
Really?
So actually, it's making it healthier. I do practice Reiki as well, which is a form of energetic healing. And I always, after I've done that with the tree, I always sit there, because I always used to think that a bit, does the tree really want all my noise? So I always give healing to the tree afterwards, whether or not, it has any effect. But certainly I can always feel that energy flowing. It's a lovely experience. It's a really nice way to feel that you're giving back to nature.
You showed me some movement you did in the restaurant last night when you were with a tree. Can you just show us?
Yeah,
not banging a microphone.
Okay. But a simple way is one hand behind your back around the small of your back and one around your heart area, standing with your back against the tree. That you will feel after a few moments, as you allow yourself to quieten in and breathe into the tree, you will feel your solar plexus going, you may even feel your heart beating faster. And they say you could stand there for 10, 15 minutes, but even a few minutes is good. And the other way is if you're standing forward against the tree, just to lean with your heart against the tree, and you make a triangle and your third eye, so you've got your third eye and your heart standing against the tree that way. Okay. That's a nice one. And that does a different meridian set than the back, relating to Chinese medicine. So you're operating slightly different parts of your...
So you're standing up straight, and I can't stand up because the camera doesn't move. So I've got my heart against the tree, and I've got this...
Yes, a triangle like that around your third eye, and you can rest, because of course the bark can be quite painful if you're resting against. So you can rest against your hands on that and just breathe again. And you'll find that one is quite kind of energizing. This one is just a little bit more deadening, and sometimes you might even feel yourself falling away completely into nature, if you're lucky, which I think can be a very rejuvenating experience.
And you can do this with any tree?
Well, that's what I thought. Actually, I've realised now after time and actually speaking to people who are more shamanically in tune than I am, that actually some trees you've got to be a little bit careful of. Some people say you should always ask the tree anyway, but oaks, beeches, pine trees, I always find are always good. So I pretty much stick with those. Oaks, beeches and pine trees are always pretty good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with ash trees as well, but oaks have always been seen as a very energizing tree. But actually yew trees, which I used to sometimes sit next to, they apparently, and this is perhaps part of the reason why you see them in churchyards, they attract negative energy as well. They're good attractor energies, and there was lots of mysticism around them, because of course if you cut them they bleed, and the berry inside of the berry is poisonous and so forth, and the leaves are poisonous, and so some people would say that there's a toxicity there, that they do carry and absorb an energy. So you may want to look into what works best for you. I'm a very sensitive person, and I could sometimes pick up some of that, so that's not good. But an oak tree, I can't go wrong with.
Yeah, the oak has this image, doesn't it, of being very solid somehow, very reliable, very tough. I don't know if it's a tough wood, but you feel oak tree is strong. And I guess that's what we're looking for, a lot of us. We're looking for a kind of a strength to have the courage to keep on our journey.
Also, the oak tree actually benefits nature. It supports 200, 300, 400 other species of life around it. It encourages an ecosystem around it in its own way.
So talk more about that, how that works.
Well, nature, as I say, is continuously, there's this interplay going on. So even if you get a little I worked with a lovely guy I met during the second book. He heard me on BBC Radio 4 once talking about the first book, and he helped me with the second book, called Dr. Alan Rayner, who is a natural scientist. And he has a pocket, he always carries a pocket magnifying glass around with him. And you go up to the bark on a tree and you look at the lichen, for instance, and you see, you enter this world that you would never know about. Water droplets and little creatures all living within this sort of what looks like a forest, almost like a little fairy tale forest in there, just with a little microphone, a microscope against the bark. And you're open up to this world that you would just take for granted. And of course the lichen is a symbiotic relationship between fungi and microbes, bacteria, and they can last for 3,000-4,000 years. Some of them have gone on living on tombstones for millennia. And you just start exploring these different aspects of nature which you probably don't give a second glance to. And then realizing that the roots under the ground of the oak tree go on for a massive distance, and they're in there, they're exchanging nutrients, minerals. So we've now worked out with radioactive treatment, we've tested that an oak tree could be sharing nutrients with a holly sapling in another part of the forest that's poor in certain minerals. Areas rich in sunlight are sharing with areas poor, which of course goes against that neo-Darwinian logic of the inherently selfish gene, where the oak tree would at best only be interested in its acorn, its genetic offspring. Actually, what we're now seeing is that nutrients have been shared between different parts of the forest. That there's mother trees, we call them mother trees, that actually share nutrients with other saplings, different species. So it's fascinating when you start exploring it. And of course you can take some of that analogy to how we are in societies, in human societies.
Well, and that's the basis of a lot of these books, isn't it? That somehow we have a potential to learn from the good sides of nature, to make our human life, our human involvement, our human adventure so much more rich, in a way I would guess easy as well.
Mm. And you get this, what I found through my own experiences in writing The Illusion of Separation, when you start attuning with this inherent grammar, which is what the Greeks talked about, which was the ultimate goal of philosophy, by the way, philos, to love, and sophia, wisdom, which was for them innate within nature. To actually attune with that, you start opening up to something which you may call non-dual awareness, but actually opening up to a deeper presence. And that helps give you a sense of purpose, a sense of service in life, of wanting to reciprocate. Certainly for me, I've understood, it's difficult to put into words, but there have been times when I've glimpsed at understanding what it means to love thy neighbour as thyself. Whereas intellectually or academically, it would always be a bit of a struggle, to understand that and to live it. But when you're there and you're attuning, you feel it. And that's therefore something you can then act upon. So it's, as well as a source of inspiration, forms, processes and relationships, it's also a deep source of wisdom. That's what I feel.
And that's there for all of us, isn't it?
Free.
So, what would you say to somebody that was in a relatively corporate environment, and doesn't matter what company they work for, and they feel, in your terms, I think you talked about almost a calling of the heart, and you found that very difficult to do in an established environment. Yet the person has the responsibility of a family and earning a living. It's not an easy dilemma to solve, is it?
No. I think having an understanding wife helps. That was quite
understanding wife.
An understanding wife is
yes.
pretty important. I was very fortunate. Well, my wife and I discussed it before I decided to leave, and actually she was up for it. She felt I should be following my heart and doing something that really made me happy. I would be a better father to our children, she said, by leaving. So I think, because you're putting quite a lot of onus on the family.
Yes.
And there's no easy way. You're leaving a financially secure job and going into unknown terrain. So you need to be prepared for that. But I think the sense of purpose and the nourishment and the well-being you get from that outweighs the financial loss. And of course, there's no reason why it needs to be a financial loss. There's lots of initiatives now that you can get involved with. You can go back and help provide advice. And I mean, I do quite a lot of teaching at universities because I feel that education is really important. I don't get paid very much at all for that, but I really enjoy doing it and seeing how I can help others become inspired. So it's about a quality that you're looking for rather than a bank balance.
And it takes courage, doesn't it, to make real change?
Yeah. I mean, courage is an interesting word because it means to come from the heart. And to step across the threshold requires you overcoming fear or letting go of fear in some way. It requires courage, and it also requires courage all the time. Every day I could question what I've done. Sometimes I do, letting go of what was an enviable job, traveling around the world and, good money, to now, doing bits and bobs. But yet, actually in your heart, you don't question it. So I think it's important to have that courage comes from a clarity, a sense of purpose. When you have that, that is like the roots of the oak tree that provide you the nourishment to be able to move forward. But as I say, you still question yourself, you still get caught up in the ego, you still compare yourself, you still may have someone like a friend or someone else or someone who's doing well or has bought another property, and you're still... I've had to take some sacrifices. I've had to rent rather than buy, for instance, a property, which puts pressure on myself, really, I suppose, as the breadwinner. So you do have to make sacrifices. But if in the grand scheme of things you have that sense of purpose, then it becomes a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Well, you have to trust as well, don't you?
Yeah.
Trust that somehow, you know, you have a feeling and you have a calling, which you very much had, and it sounds right, but you don't know it's going to work out. You've got that element of trust, and somehow there's the determination to keep. You know, I know for myself in the past, it's like you really have to say, right, I'm going along this line.
Yeah.
People are trying to knock you off.
Yeah.
You're going to try and knock yourself off at times, and you've just got to stay with it. And you've got to say, well, I'm going along this line, I've got to give it time. I've got to see if it is for me, if it is my destiny, in your word, if it is going to work. And if you don't have that, and you're all over the place, you're getting a mess. And I see that with people, they're just getting a mess.
Yeah, this is very important. You're dead right, Ian. And I suppose my backup was always, well, worst comes to worst, I always just go back to corporate life.
Yeah.
But of course, reality is the longer you're out, the more your CV is devalued. But I never question really what I'm doing. But you're right. What really keeps me going, I suppose, is a sense of trust, knowing that in following my heart, doors open. Weird stuff happens, you know, synchronicities, and you're more attuned to them. I got a call the other day from a senior guy in America to ask if I would go and spend 10 days in the Panama jungle with 10 hand-picked CEOs from leading organizations in America. Would I spend time with them? And I was like, oh, well, hang on, what do I need to do? You know, 10 days is a long time for me to manage a workshop. I'm not, you know, you don't have to do anything. You just have to come, Giles, and be yourself and engage in conversations when we meet indigenous tribes and we talk around the fire at night and provoke change. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have written those books and I hadn't have had that time out, because you know, that organization was watching and studying who I was and what I was doing. So, you know, things come. I do believe that if you put the right intent out there and truly live it, that doors open.
What does be yourself mean to you?
I suppose natural awareness. Being there in natural awareness is allowing the self to come through rather than the ego self. I think the ego self is a useful tool. I don't think it's a case of trying to negate it or to ask it to evaporate. It's a useful tool that helps us get on in life. But when it dominates or takes over or clouds our thinking and habituations, then we can't allow our deeper self to come through. So it's trying to create space and an environment for that deeper presence to come through, and then you can more be yourself. You can more sit in your truth and feel comfortable in it and be more present.
You see, I can imagine people watching this saying, how do I know the difference between my deeper self and my ego self?
Okay. Well, I can sense it because one's a kind of edgy, not necessarily relaxed in the moment aliveness. It's interesting, Iain McGilchrist, who you've interviewed, talks about the left and right brain hemispheres and how they engage with the world, and it's quite a similar relationship here between the ego self and, you know, because the right brain apparently sees the world in its lived-in context, very present. The left brain is what grasps at things. And that, in a way, can feel good, that grasping, you know, and sometimes being in the ego can feel good because you're getting somewhere and you're doing something. So it's not about saying being naturally present is better than being in the ego. I suppose it's learning to recognize when you are and what's happening. Just being more aware of yourself, knowing thyself. Actually, I call in the book, I say knowing thyself dash self. Self with a small s and self with a big S, because it's actually the relationship, I feel, between the ego self and self is what that you're needing to know. Because there always will be a tension and a relationship there. So it's actually becoming more aware of how that manifests in your own expression of life within me, which is probably different for you and probably different for everyone else. But what a lovely thing to start learning, for me anyway, to start getting comfortable with. Of course, you start then loving yourself more, and that helps you love others more. You know, it kind of helps as a positive cycle.
It's funny, something just come in my mind I'm going to mention. I don't know if it's directly helpful to the question I asked. which I was partly asking myself as well as with you. Renata and I, we went to this. We go out. We're relatively social, and we go out to dinner a lot. And we more and more we get put off restaurants because they're so noisy. Just you know, you're in a table and the sound's bouncing off the walls, and the people at the restaurant, the people at the next table speaking louder and louder. So we start speaking louder and louder. And we were invited to a private dinner with 12 people at someone's apartment in London on Sunday evening. And she said to me afterwards, and I had noticed, she said, "Do you remember the 2 periods of quite long silence where 12 people were sitting together, and possibly for, it wasn't 5 minutes, but maybe for 2 minutes, nobody spoke?" And I said, I had noticed them, yes. And I felt very comfortable with them because everybody else did. And in a way, I would say that for me has been one of the keys in knowing myself, is being in that silence. Because to start with, the first few seconds, the mind is coming in and saying, I should start saying this. And no, just leave it alone. It's that being quiet, being silent, and being able to be silent, especially in company, is quite key, actually. Is that something you find helpful?
Silence, or the spaciousness, I would say, is the matrix of nature. And the energetic, we mentioned as well, this kind of energetic responsiveness that comes within this spaciousness. I mean, the ancient Indians used to talk about the Shakti and Shiva dance, or the Shiva Lingam and the Yoni, you know, this tantric relationship that we have. And that silence, or that spaciousness, is, I feel, the presence, the divine ground. And without being able to tune into that and have that awareness there within you, and always call upon that and have that there, then you get caught up in the world of noisy notes. Real music, I think it was Claude Debussy who said, music is the space between the notes. You know, it's really being able to enjoy the silence enables us to then go about our daily business. So we don't have to then spend our time in a monastery or a hermitage just to be in the space all the time. But for me, to clear my mind out in the morning and in the evening and have that time of meditation and silence enables me to then be able to call upon it or be aware of it during the day. And that for me is the beginning of being able to see my own illusion, you know, to not get caught up in the busyness. So I totally agree with you. I think the silence it's delicious. Anyway, it's lovely.
The beginning of seeing your own delusion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the clock. It's saying we've got a minute or two left. Is there anything you want to say in the last couple of minutes?
Perhaps about the importance of love in all this. I feel I talk about that in the book, and I think it's a word that's often misunderstood in current society, and I think it has its place in this shift that we're on the cusp of, bringing the love back in to ourselves, each other, and the world around us. That was what brought me on this path, was that immense love of nature, of love of life, and that is what I feel flowing through again when I'm present. So I would like to finish on love.
It's a pretty good place to finish, I think. Okay, Giles, thank you very much.
Thank you, Iain. Thank you very much.
I'm going to show the books again. The Illusion of Separation, Exploring the Cause of Our Current Crisis, and The Nature of Business, Redesigning for Resilience, Giles Hutchins. So thank you, Giles, and thank you everyone out there for watching Conscious TV, and I do hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.